You know what time it is. Time for another train wreck. Welcome to Not Another Baptist Podcast, a weekly podcast about what two pastors in New Mexico are learning in the trenches of church revitalization. I'm Matt Hensley, the pastor of May Hill Baptist, and I'm joined by...
I'm Kyle Bierman, the pastor of First Baptist Church in Alamogordo, New Mexico.
And that's you.
Oh, that's me. Okay, I'll get that part out. All right. And we bring a combined 31 years of experience in vocational ministry, and we still haven't figured it out. So we're glad that you've tuned in to learn from our mistakes, to laugh a little bit, and enjoy some occasional chats with some key leaders in the Southern Baptist Convention.
Yep. And before we talk about that, this podcast is sponsored by the Christian Standard Bible. So you could say, as we often do, that we're the official podcast of the Word of God. We love the CSB because of its blend of readability and accuracy, and encourage you to check out csbible.com after the show. Well, Kyle, what is in store for us today?
Well, let's see. We've made trips, or at least through web chats, to Texas, Georgia, to the Carolinas, to Missouri, and to Louisiana. And today it looks like we've made it to the left coast, out to California.
The place of my birth.
That explains so much for our listeners. They just understood a lot when with that little.
Everything makes sense now.
Yes. All right. Anyway, back to the task at hand. We are delighted today to welcome Dr. Jeff Iorg, president of Gateway Seminary, to the show. Dr. Iorg, say hello. Tell us a little bit about your family.
Hey, thanks for having me, guys. Glad to talk to you from California. Well, my family, I'm married to Ann, been married 38 years. We have 3 adult children. All 3 of them are vitally engaged in ministry and Christian service, so we're delighted about that. And then I have 4 grandchildren that are perfect, frankly. And so that's our family. We're scattered from Europe to the West Coast and involved in all kinds of different things. But my wife and I live here in Southern California and do our work from here.
Awesome. Well, before we talk about Gateway and how you got there and all of that good stuff, I have a hard-hitting question right off the bat. Okay. There's a lot of talk about soteriology, whether it's Calvinism or traditionalism or something in between. There's a lot of talk about political involvement or maybe not being involved. There's a lot of entity head openings, as you know. So here we go. Pulled pork or brisket?
Always brisket.
Okay.
No question about it.
Spoken like a true Texan, I believe.
Yes. I grew up there, and my love for barbecue started there. And yes, I may be the only person who has on his official bio that one of my hobbies is searching for the world's best barbecue restaurant. And the quest continues day by day.
I still think when we visited the last time, I had the pleasure of visiting with you with our friends at the Potluck Podcast. And that was one of the questions or something similar that I encouraged you to get out to Grand Prairie during the SBC meeting, I believe, and hit up Edelman's. I don't know if you've made it there yet, but that still needs to be on your list. And if you go back to the DFW area, and if you make it here, we've got a place called Mad Jack's up in Cloudcroft, of all places, the middle of New Mexico here, that is some phenomenal barbecue. If you get there early enough, you might have to stand out in line at about 9:30 or 10, but you can get some. And when he finds out that you're from Texas, you might be standing in line and he'll hit his little spatula or his knife or whatever and be flying brisket over to you and land on your nose or wherever. He's got some pretty good aim, but it's a wonderful place. But let's get back to the topic. What brought you to Gateway in the first place?
Well, I was happily working in the Pacific Northwest. I had moved there in 1989 to plant a church. After a number of years of doing that, I had transitioned to work for the state convention there. While I was doing that, I was teaching adjunctively for the seminary and also involved in our campus that we have in the Portland area. Plus, on top of all that, I got involved with the former president in some leadership consultation and on a task force that he put together about some leadership issues. And so I just had a growing relationship to the seminary. And then in 2004, when Dr. Bill Cruz, who was before me as president, retired, the seminary trustees asked me if I would consider being president. So first day I ever worked for a school, I was president. I didn't really set out to do this. I never had this as a career objective or a ministry goal or anything like that. I was quite focused on my work in the Northwest, but really felt like God was leading me to do this. And it turned out, after looking back for the last 15 years, I think that was the right call.
Now, Matt and I both will joke that we are foreign missionaries from the great state of Texas, foreign missionaries serving in outside the Bible Belt now. And right. Now it would seem that California has some unique challenges in regards to Christianity in general. And I would assume those probably apply to theological education as well. So out there now, especially that you're in Southern California, how do you and how does Gateway navigate those challenges unique to California?
Well, most of the challenges that people from the South or Southeast think are real in California are myths, quite honestly. California is a place of incredible opportunity for the gospel. There are several incredible churches that have been built in California, multiple ministries. Just start naming the ministries that have started in California. Large and influential seminaries have been in California for the last 50 years. So there's a myth that somehow California is antagonistic to the gospel, or that it's super hard to be here with the gospel, or that Christianity is under some kind of attack here. And really, that's just simply not true. Now, there's no doubt that there are pockets of incredible resistance to the gospel here, but those pockets are also found in Dallas and Atlanta and New York City and all other places. But here, we don't wake up every day dreading the thought of having to be here representing the gospel or trying to grow churches or trying to build a seminary. It's actually quite refreshing to know that we can make a significant impact, because lostness is so prevalent around us that we just go after people with the gospel and watch the results. And if you really think about it, just think about the churches that have been built here over the last 50 years, and think about the schools that have been built, and think about the ministries, national, global ministries that all started in Southern California. And you can see that that this is really an awesome place to be for the gospel. Now, quite honestly, Northern California and Portland were more challenging places than Southern California because the culture there is more aggressive about the liberalism and more aggressive about the lostness and how it's presented. But Southern California is awesome.
I think what he just said, Kyle, was that you are fake news.
That's not the first time, and it probably won't be the last either.
I wouldn't go that far. I mean, obviously there's things about California that are significantly challenging, but they're not obstacles to the gospel's advance. I mean, the gospel goes forward in every context, in every culture, in every setting, and there's not any reason why it can't go forward here. I mean,
have those myths that I mean, we just mentioned, and you pointed out as myths, have those created any challenges to your work there in Southern California?
Yeah, the people that live here would say no, but it's really sad, because when I travel in the South or Southeast, I often hear a couple things that are discouraging to us. One is people say, well, if you're in California, you must be liberal. Because if you're there, you've had to compromise in order to survive, and that's just so wrong, and it's such an insult to Christians in the West who are faithful to the Lord and to the Word. And the second thing that's sometimes discouraging is when people say, well, the only people are in the West people who really just couldn't cut it in the South, or couldn't get jobs in the South. And I always just laugh and think about, like, I'm sorry Rick Warren couldn't get a job in the South, but he managed to do okay out here. And there's just dozens and dozens, if not hundreds, of people out here that are so incredibly capable of leading, and they could lead anywhere in the world, and yet they choose to do so in the West. And so, those two myths are discouraging to us sometimes. But when you live here, you realize that the things about the West that make it so invigorating in terms of ministry are simply that there is no Christian subculture, and there's no cultural Christianity. And so, as my son said once to me when he was in high school, he was the only Christian on his 100-person football team in high school. And he said, Dad, I asked him one time, do you ever wish that you'd grown up in the South where there are a lot more Christians and larger churches? And he said, no, Dad, not ever. And he goes, and he said this, he made this statement, Dad, if you're a Christian in Oregon, you are because you want to be. There's no other reason. And there's no cultural reason to be a Christian in the West. You just either want to be one or you don't. And that makes it pretty refreshing, actually, to do ministry.
And that's been my favorite part of New Mexico is it's no longer just what you do on Sunday or whatever. You're finding people that,
Right.
where we live are 90 to 95% lostness. And so it is a mission field. And we joke about being foreign missionaries out of the great nation of Texas or whatever. But in a sense, it does seem like we really are. And it's a wonderful thing. And like you said, it is invigorating for sure. One of my favorite questions that we ask the entity leaders that come on with us is this one. What has been a challenge that you or maybe Gateway has faced where you can look back and the only words that you can really say are just, wow, thank you, God. Like, this is something that God has so clearly orchestrated and done that you just got out of the way and you just can look back and say, thank you, Jesus, for what you have done. What would be one of those at Gateway?
Well, there's only one, and that is the whole process of relocating the seminary. We moved one of the 10 largest seminaries in the country 400 miles, and we did it with absolute unity and with unbelievable, miraculous intervention by God. And I wrote the book, Leading Major Change in Your Ministry, and that tells the story of the seminary's relocation. But in that book, I have a chapter called The 7 Miracles. And, we don't use that word lightly, especially around the academy and around faculty and all of that. But, we have 7 categories of miraculous activity, or 7 miracle stories that happened for us that really were supernatural interventions by God to help us accomplish this project. And, we did face incredible opposition to redevelopment of our campus. And after a multi-year legal battle in the Bay Area, we lost. And not just a legal battle, but a political battle and a public relations battle as well. And so when the opportunity came to sell the seminary and move, it was, you understand the seminary was never listed for sale. We never contacted a broker. We never put the property up for sale. A person walked into my office and offered to buy the property and to buy all the existing development rights and expiring entitlements with no strings attached about the future. And so that moved us down the path. But that was just the first of 7 incredible moments in our lives where God, brought us together and moved us. And when I say move the seminary, most people think, well, how do you move a library, or how do you, move a faculty program, or how do you move a classroom? And that's just so easy. That's one phone call. That's nothing. Moving the seminary involved dozens and dozens and dozens of families, both students, faculty, and staff. Their spouses all quit their jobs. They all left their churches. They all took their kids out of their schools. I can't even describe to you the sacrifices people made. And they came together, and we picked up a seminary and moved it 400 miles. And I think about that. I don't know where 400 miles is from you, but that would be like probably Amarillo or something like that, or maybe even farther. I don't know. But that's what it's like. And we did that. And I'm sitting here today, 4.5 years after the announcement of the move. And I've never received an email, a text, a phone call, or a visit from any current employee or student expressing opposition to the relocation. Wow. God gave us 100% unity. And when you start thinking about special needs children that had to be taken out of their programs and moved to Southern California and start over, you think about spouses that had 6-figure incomes in the Bay Area, in the medical profession, and in other communities that walked away from those jobs to come with the seminary. I could just go on and on and on about what it was like, but we look back on that, and I wrote a book about it. Obviously, there were some leadership things we did that facilitated the relocation, but we also have a strong sense that apart from God's intervention, it couldn't have happened. And when you look back on what happened, it's like nothing that I'd ever experienced, although I've been a part of relocating other ministries and building other facilities and doing things like that. This was on a scale and scope that was really unprecedented, and it's never been done in American Christianity. And one of the most interesting things about that is no one in Christian media cared. And you know why they didn't care? Because we didn't have a fight. We never had one story about the real. We moved one of the 10 largest seminaries in America. We moved it 400 miles with no disruption. We were closed for only 5 weeks in the summer of the move. We built 2 brand new campuses in California, one in Southern California, one in Northern California. We wound up with $30 million left over that we added to our endowment, doubling our endowment. And we did that with absolute unity, no loss of enrollment. And we never made, except for Baptist Press, never picked up, no one cared. And that really showed us something, and that is the Christian community in America really is thriving on scandal and difficulty and turmoil, but they don't even notice when God does a miracle. So it was really sad to say that happened, but nonetheless, we know the miracles happen. We know the story, and we know how profound it changed our school and how much it changed our people. So it's been amazing to watch that happen.
I'm sure one of the things you would share along those lines that prayer, obviously, would all of that was bathed in prayer. Give us maybe a short synopsis of a leadership principle that maybe somebody that's listening in that might find themselves in the need to maybe move, sell, or whatever it might be, that might be facing some public resistance or might be facing their own congregation's resistance. What aside from prayer, we can't emphasize that enough, but aside from prayer, how would you lead through a move of a church or a ministry that a listener might be listening in that could help from?
Well, I just, like I said, just wrote a 300-page book about it, so it's hard to pick out one thing, but I give you one or two. The first thing I would say is that I've moved or relocated or transitioned 4 ministries in 35 years. And each time that's happened, there's something that's occurred that I call a signal, SIGNAL, a signal event. And a signal event is a supernatural experience that God brings into a ministry organization or brings into a church, which really signals to everyone it's time to do this particular move or relocation or transition or change. And in each instance that I've done this, there's been a signal event. And for us, the signal event at the relocation was when the person walked into my office and offered to give me $100 million for the campus. That was not something that any of us could have created. It was something that only God could have done. And when I told that story to our board and later to our faculty and staff and students, there was a holy sense of hush that almost came on the room. God has intervened. And so people often ask me, how did you get the people to unify? And I say, I didn't. I mean, God unified them by doing something so dramatic that he gave a signal, it's time to go. And I could give other illustrations of that, but one of the hardest things in leadership to do sometimes is to wait until God's timing is right, until God gives the signal to go forward. And then the second thing I would say is when you're managing or leading through a very significant change like this, you need to learn the difference as a leader between change and transition. And those are two very different things. There's whole groups of literature and books and everything that have been written on these two things and how they're not the same. And quite honestly, most Christian leaders focus too much on change and not enough on transition management. And that's sad because we are uniquely equipped to be great transition leaders, but we just don't know that because we've been taught that leading change we've been taught how to lead change, but we've not really acknowledged what it means to lead transition. So that's a complicated and complex issue to talk about in a short podcast. But if you can look for a signal event and learn the difference between change and transition and really study how to do both of those, then I think you can lead these kind of major changes more effectively.
Well, Matt and I both know that you've been in the pulpit a few more times than we have. And so one of the things we like to ask seasoned preachers is...
You're just saying I'm old. And I'm
no.
I get it.
That's what it sounded like to me. I didn't write it.
You said you have 31 years combined. Dude, I got more than that by myself. So you're right. I am old, man.
So with experience, right, comes probably some memorable moments. And so we like to ask those who've preached a lot, what is the most embarrassing moment you've had while preaching?
Oh, I've got two of them.
Share them both.
The first one was my second sermon. So context, my first sermon that I ever preached, something remarkable happened. I preached my message. I gave an invitation, and there was a significant public response, startling to me and humbling in some ways, but nevertheless, very real. So I was asked to preach a few weeks later at a different church and my second sermon. Now, by this time, I've preached once, and I've proven that I'm God's gift to preaching because of the fabulous response. And so I worked up my second sermon, and I went there and preached. And I preached the whole sermon in about 8 minutes. And so I decided to do what everyone would do, and that is I preached it again. And the second time through, it took me about 6 minutes. So now I'm up to about 14 or 15 minutes. And so, not knowing what else to do, but knowing I needed to fill the time, I preached it again. And the third time through, it took me about 3 minutes. And so I preached my sermon through about 3 times in less than 20 minutes. And I sat down completely humiliated. And then they had an ice cream thing after the service. And so I stayed for that because I felt like I had to. And this little old lady comes up to me on a walker. And she puts her hand out, kind of crippled hand. And she's got her fingers kind of crooked over. And I reached out to take her hand. And when I did, she slipped something into my hand. And it turned out to be a $20 bill. And she looks at me and she says, "Young man, it's young men like you who give old ladies like me a hope for when Dr. Graham is no longer with us." And I wanted to have the ground open up and swallow me in that moment because I was so embarrassed by my stupid sermon, my arrogant attitude, and the fact that this dear little lady was giving me a 20 and calling me the next Billy Graham. It was one of the worst experiences of my life. And I'll tell you how bad it was. God did not let me speak in front of people for a year after that. Wow. I did not get another invitation. Now, I've preached about probably 6,000 or 7,000 times since then, and I want to tell you, I've preached some bad sermons and I've done some dumb things, but I have never, ever been as arrogant as I was at that second sermon. God just busted my hide. That was a bad day. So that was a bad day. Okay, so here's another one. So I was preaching at a church that had a choir. And I'm pretty fired up when I'm getting ready to preach. I'm in the moment. I'm ready to go. And I think the most important minute of a message are the first 30 seconds that you start and the last 30 seconds that you end. And I think you've got to get those exactly right. And so I'm primed. I've got my first 30 seconds memorized. I'm ready to start the message. I'm sitting on the edge of my seat on the platform, ready to go. And the choir is singing. Now, I'm not a musician, so you'll have to bear with me, but they're singing, and they're going through their song, and it's a beautiful song. And all of a sudden they go, and they stop. And I think, boom. And I stand up and I take about 4 strides to the pulpit like I'm going to deliver and I get about halfway to the pulpit and I realize, and the choir hits the downbeat and starts up again. And I realized that this was not the end of their song. This was just some kind of musical pause or something written into the music. So I'm standing there literally with 1 foot in the air, kind of frozen between the pulpit and the seat that I've left, with this choir behind me just cracking up laughing. And they're trying not to laugh and they're trying to sing, and the audience has lost it. And I'm just sort of freeze framed there like something out of a Roadrunner cartoon or something, And I just stood there like a statue while they finished their song. And then I kind of creeped back over and sort of sat down a little bit and waited till the applause and all of the laughter died down. And then I went to the pulpit, and I don't remember those first 30 seconds of the pulpit of the message that day because it was not what I had planned. But yeah, that really happened. It was a bad moment, but that was a funny one. The first one was just humiliating. The second one was just funny. So, stuff like that happens. It's good times.
I will say that my folks, if you could still preach 3 sermons in 20 minutes, they would hire you in about 5 seconds. That's kind of the ongoing thing with ours. So
Awesome.
my mom turns off my sermons at the 25-minute mark. She said, if you can't say it in 25 minutes, I don't need to hear it. But so thank you for that. Those one humiliating, one certainly funny, and I think we've all been there. Either stood up a little too soon, or we shared a meme the other day of when you think you're about to belt out the next line of the verse or the chorus or whatever it might be in a song, and you're about half a beat too soon, and just whatever it is, and then everybody comes. Those kind of moments are what make ministry just so fun.
They are
for sure. But back to Gateway just for a moment as we begin to wind down. What is God up to right now? You've talked about the move. You talked about some of that in the past, how he was faithful through all of that. What is God up to right now at Gateway that you want our folks to hear about?
Well, we have been here now 2 full years, and we've started our 3rd year. So we've sort of reached what we call a new normal. And our focus is now entirely on our mission and training people, sending them around the world, doing what we do. But one of the new things we've launched in the last year or so is called the Chinese English Bilingual Program. And it's a Mandarin-based program, but the students need conversational English, of course, to be able to navigate the seminary. And we are really building a network in Southern California, particularly of Chinese pastors. We had about 80 pastors from the greater Los Angeles area in our building on Monday of this week. We're also networking in Taiwan, Singapore, mainland China, all kinds of places. And we are anticipating that we will be able to build a remarkable program that's going to make a significant difference in the Chinese church globally in the years to come. So that's sort of the newest thing happening here, and the thing that we, again, Signal Event, God gave us a very large gift to help us get that started. And we've been praying about it for several years. That gift never came, and then boom, it did. And so we pulled the trigger, and we're making this happen. So that's the newest thing and most recent way that God has really intersected our school. But it's just in some ways back to normal here, business as usual, which is for us pretty exciting stuff, training people for the global mission of the gospel. But the Chinese English program, that's the newest thing and the most exciting new thing that God is doing at Gateway.
All right. And so as these things are coming up, how can we and how can our listeners be praying for you and for the really our Gateway family as Southern Baptists?
Hey, prayer is the first thing, but there's 3 things you can do, and every seminary president will tell you the same thing. Number 1, pray for us. It is a spiritual battle every day. Spiritual warfare is real. The devil is real, and we face obstacles here, but those are the same obstacles everybody else faces. So I'm not trying to say it's any worse or different here. It's just bad. It's just a bad spiritual time in so many ways in America, and we just need to be diligent and vigilant about what we're doing. And then send us students, man. That's the second thing you can do. If you know somebody wants to train for ministry outside the Bible Belt, come see us. And then last thing, find ways to support us, and primarily do that through the Cooperative Program. And I've said this 1,000 times, other places, not just giving a commercial. It's the real thing. There wouldn't be a Gateway Seminary without the Cooperative Program. I mean, if Southern Baptists in the West had been responsible for building this seminary, it would have been done so much more slowly, because the resource base here in the 50s, 60s, 70s, and 80s was just so much smaller. Now it's a different story. Now we have some large giving churches in the West, and we're grateful for that. But if it weren't for the Cooperative Program and God's grace, there wouldn't be a Gateway Seminary. So just keep doing what you do, guys. Pray for us, send to students, and keep supporting what Southern Baptists do globally through the CP, and that helps us every month here at Gateway.
Awesome. And we're going to put a link in the show notes to the book you've mentioned. So those that may be facing some changes in their churches or wanting to lead out in transitions and changes, that maybe they can look up that and buy that and add it to their 1,000, 2,000, 5,000, 10,000 book library. And that reminds me of the one question I failed to ask you. And so it can be real quick. How many books are in your library?
Oh, not very many. I've been giving them away, honestly.
Okay.
I just gave away 5 more boxes last week out of my library. And the reason I'm giving it away is because I don't need it. I work within very short walking distance of the 2nd largest theological library in the Western United States. And so it just seemed unwise to me. So I'm giving my books away. I just recently gave five books of commentaries off my shelves to pastors in Wyoming. I'm just giving them away to places that don't have access, because I can walk down the hall and it's just not. So I'm not a library builder. I have, and I also buy almost all electronic books and have bought those for years. And so I wouldn't even know how many of those I have, but I can't give those away. But all my paper ones, I'm just giving them away.
Well, I'm texting you my address right now, but as much as I don't want to, it is time to hop off the train until next time. We're grateful that you took the time to listen in today. And if you haven't, be sure to subscribe on iTunes or wherever you enjoy your podcast. And if you like what you heard, lay down a 5-star review so we keep these things coming. You can visit us online at www.notanother.baptistpodcast.com, or on Facebook under Not Another Baptist Podcast, or on Twitter at NAB_podcast. Thanks, Dr. Iorg and Kyle. Send us out.
Until next time, may your coffee be as black as night and as bold as the gospel you declare.
I'm so glad you got it right this time, Kyle. Thank you. Dr. Iorg, thank you so much. We're praying for you. We love you guys, and have a wonderful day.
Thanks, guys.